And we're up the next morning enjoying breakfast, and today we're going to continue our tour of the city with a local guide.
Good morning, everyone. And welcome to Philadelphia. My name is David. I'll be the one taking you around today. If you have a question, please ask it. I can't answer it unless you ask it, and there's no such thing as a stupid question, no matter what it is. You may have heard that the city of Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love, and we are. However, when it comes to crossing the streets, it's every man for himself, and there is safety in numbers. So please stay together as a group, especially when we're going to be crossing the streets. Today's tour is going to be a lot of riding and a little bit of walking here and there. What I am wearing is the uniform of a Revolutionary War soldier. It's made out of linen, which meant that you could grow the flax yourself here in your own backyard and then spin it into what they called homespun. You'll notice that it is not tailor-made. As a matter of fact, it's typical Army issue, size 2. Too big or too small. One size fits nobody. But it was very cool and comfortable to fight in. And it gave Washington the opportunity to give his army a uniform appearance. And these were cheap and easy to come by. Of course, they didn't provide you much protection here in the winter time, but you were grateful for whatever you could get. Well, I think we're ready if we can get onto the bus now.
When William Penn founded the colony of Pennsylvania, he was founding it as a haven for the persecuted peoples of the world. He was a persecuted person. Persecuted not only by other Englishmen, but by his own family. His father was Admiral Sir William Penn, head of the British Navy. Well, you can imagine the Admiral's dismay, being a lifetime military man, to discover that his son and heir had become a Quaker pacifist and refused to take up arms for any reason whatsoever. William Sr. threw William Jr. out of the house twice, but they finally made up their differences, and when William Sr. died, he left everything to Jr. But he gave Penn so much land, Penn didn't know what to do with it all. William Penn was the richest landowner in American history. He owned all of Pennsylvania, all of Delaware, and about a third of New Jersey. Well, he wanted Philadelphia to be a showplace city, so he actually planned this city back in England before they ever came over here in 1681. This is the first planned city in America, and because of that, we have this marvelous, or monotonous, depending on your point of view, gridiron pattern of streets. Almost all the streets of Philadelphia are at right angles. When they started the building over here that we call Independence Hall, it was 1732. The city extended up to 4th Street and had 10,000 people. By 1775, the city extended up 2 more blocks to 7th or 8th Street. We had 40,000 people in Philadelphia, making Philadelphia the largest English-speaking city in the world outside of the British Isles.
This was also a very important place on September 17th of 1787, because a huge crowd gathered here on the last day of the Constitutional Convention, which was called the Philadelphia Convention then. Nobody knew they were writing a brand new constitution, to find out what had gone on in that room you were just in. The whole convention had been held in secret. Remember, these people were not there to write a new constitution. They were there ostensibly to improve the Articles of Confederation, the loose form of government that had kept us together through the war. Well, after scrapping the articles after the first week of debate, they went beyond their authorization to write the Constitution. So they decided to hold it in secret. But everybody in the city knew something was up, and they wanted to find out what. Well, the first one out of the door was 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin, the oldest delegate there. So crippled by gout, he could scarcely walk. Matter of fact, they had to carry him. And a woman in the crowd yells out to him, "Dr. Franklin, our new government, what have you given us? A monarchy, a republic, what?" And he turned and replied, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." And that's been the admonition to us ever since. It's our republic, it's up to us to keep it. The capital did eventually move to Washington, District of Columbia, but for 10 years, from 1790 to 1800, that was the capital.
perhaps the most famous of all the alleyways is the one that we're just about to walk down, Alvarez Valley, which is the oldest continuously inhabited street in America with people living on both sides of the street. Some of the buildings here date back to 1720, but people have been living on the street even before then.
This is a cobblestone street. This is the way the streets of Philadelphia would have been paved when they were paved. Most of the streets of Philadelphia in colonial times were dirt. The narrow end of the house always went on the street because you were taxed on the amount of street frontage you had. But then you could run the house back as far as you wanted, and some of these go back quite a ways. In the early years, most of the houses had these little pent roofs over the doorway to shed water, all right? They began to fall out of favor. And so as the 18th century progressed, the pent roof got smaller and smaller, so the house began to scoop out, until at the very end of the century, they do away with it entirely, instead have a double row of bricks here as a water course to let the water drip off. Also, early on in the 18th century, they tended to use what they called glazed headers. The short bricks are headers, the long ones are stretchers. This is called Flemish bonding, where you have header, stretcher, header, stretcher. Flemish bond early on used these glazed headers. They would burn these black at the ends, so they would create a decorative effect. That kind of fell out as style towards the end of the 18th century, so during the Federalist period, you still have Flemish bond, but it's all one color brick. So this is a Federal era building. Now the reason that you put up an insurance marker was to let the volunteer firemen know the building was insured, because most damage back then was not caused by the flames. It was caused by careless and negligent firemen who would break down doors and windows and maybe rip off your house if they thought they could get away with it. All the fire departments would come out. They'd look up at the building, see who had insured it, and only that fire department affiliated with that insurance carrier put out the fire. Everybody else stood around and made fun of how they did it. If somebody is knocking on your door and you're on the second floor, how do you see who it is? It may be a bill collector for all you know. So you set up these busybodies, which are three-way mirrors. They look up and down the street to see who's coming and down at the door to see who's knocking. I like to think of them as the 18th century equivalent of our modern answering machine. You know how you get, I'm not home right now, but leave your name and number and I'll get back to you. You know he's there. He's monitoring that call. And the same is true with these. You can beat your hand on the door until your knuckles are raw, and you look up and you see this pair of eyes looking down at you in the mirror, and they're pretending not to be home. Well, where we are is the home of Betsy Ross. Betsy Ross has been credited with making the first American flag. In all probability, she didn't do that. However, she did make American flags for the American government and for the Pennsylvania State Navy. Flags were most important for the Navy rather than the Army, because that's how you identified yourself out when you were out at sea.
The Betsy Ross house is free, so that makes it a very nice attraction. And it's a very typical representation of what a colonial house would have looked like in the early 1700s. It's a small house with just 5 rooms open, but the artifacts are representative of the daily life, and then we have specific items that relate to Betsy Ross, the flag maker. She was also a musket ball maker. So this home was built for the Ross family in the early 1700s. Now it's owned and operated by the city of Philadelphia, and again, it's free.
This top-masted schooner here to the right is Philadelphia's own tall ship, the Gazella, which is set up as a pirate ship right now as the haunted ship for Halloween. Just to our left here, this is Franklin Court, to our left. And across the street to our right is the Masonic Temple. I love the statue here to the right. Yes, that mishmash of people is called Government by the People. As we come to the first diagonal street designed in Philadelphia, it's Franklin Parkway. And it was Philadelphia's answer to the question of the time period, how are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? Well, the answer, bring a bit of Paris to Philadelphia. This was modeled after the Champs-Élysées in Paris. To our left is Logan Circle with its famous swan fountain. This is an original casting of Augustus Rodin's The Thinker. And behind it is another sculpture of Rodin's The Gates of Hell. And this marks the entrance to the Rodin Museum, the largest collection of artworks by that artist in the world outside of Paris.